I did get the spark plug tray figured out. I think I'm going with this route, and what I'll do is I'll probably get a riv nut or something to bolt this into, so I don't have to TIG weld anything crazy in there, like a threaded insert or something, because that's going to be really hard. I will have to make this out of a thicker material so that not only the bolts fit all the way, but so that the boot here actually seals, because right now it doesn't, even if the spring's fully compressed. And this is from a Toyota Yaris, which is also the same as a Toyota Prius, which is kind of hilarious. But that's what the coil-on plug that I'm going with, because it has a 4-wire lead, which basically means that it has its own igniter, so it doesn't need a coil pack. So it's coil-on plug, and it has its own igniter built in. So basically that's all I need to wire up, as opposed to running very large spark plug leads. New brake rotors in the rear, new brake pads definitely in the rear. Front might be able to get away with just a resurfacing, but these are horrible, so just going to replace them entirely. I think they're like $7, so not a big deal. All right, so we went ahead and we cut our old throttle cable down, took a good 3 or 4 feet off of it, and basically right now it's about 1 foot long, and it curves straight out of the back here, which is going to be kind of our wiring hole and stuff, and we'll put some hose on there or something to keep that from rubbing through. But basically, yeah, so we've got this, and that's our throttle linkage. It's a crimp connection, but we couldn't find a new one anywhere in town. Even the internet was pretty scarce. So we were reusing the old one, at least for right now. We might upgrade it later, or we might slice it to allow it to sit deeper and then re-crimp it on there and use something like a hose clamp to help keep that on there so that it doesn't come off. But again, the way it's set, it's kind of pushing in anyway. And this piece being clamped on here, it should hold the throttle cable in place. And then right now we've got still a bit extra wire. We cut it down, but we want to leave plenty extra just in case. So we'll go ahead and wrap it around the throttle body and put our fitting inside the OEM slot and see how it fits. So we got it hooked up. Got our clamp in here. We can't actually fit a screwdriver in here, which is a little bit of a, I don't know, miscalculation, I guess. Even my stubby is like still like I've got no room. Maybe if I put a bit on there with a socket or something, I can get it to turn tighter. But just using some pliers, seems like it's pretty tight on there. It doesn't seem like it's slipping. So let's go ahead and see how our throttle feels. Alright, down in the engine bay, we have the OEM clutch line, which used to sit going to the other side of the car. Got it rerouted. Coming up, we've got a little couple of adapters here, basically getting that 6mm line. We've put a 1/4 inch fitting on it. Since it's about 20 thousandths or half a millimeter off, it should seal, we'll find out. And then from there we went to an AN line, converting over from that inverted flare fitting. And that goes up. That'll clamp, hold it on the frame rail, and going right down into the transmission for the slave cylinder, and reusing the banjo bolt that I found that was already on there. Hopefully that'll work. But that's what we got for our clutch. It is in. Now we need to bleed the clutch and get this thing running. Alright, so pretty much what I've done here, I went ahead and went down to Advanced Auto Parts, and I picked up a couple of things. So one, this is coupler. That is a bubble flare coupler for both sides. So basically this is going to connect straight to the original line that goes under the car in the back. And then connected that to a hard line, that's a 20-inch hard line. Got it to bend around, up and around the subframe, and then up along the side of the frame rail, and then coming out on the back behind where the sway bar connection is going to be, as well as behind where the travel limit strap is going to be for the rear suspension, so that's not going to get in the way of anything. From there we have this line that's basically the same length as the stock Mini Cooper line. That's sort of how we set it up, but it has the fitting that fits, which is inverted flare that fits into the caliper. The Mini Cooper didn't have an inverted flare, it had a bubble flare inside the caliper, I think is what it was. Which basically snakes from the Mini hard line right there. We're gonna have to come up with a bracket to make sure that clamps on like it was supposed to for OEM. It's gonna go up behind the coilover, up around, hug in tight. So it's gonna hug in tight to the frame rail around here, kink down, and it's gonna come out, not where that is. It's gonna come out like that, right on the side. And then the soft rubber line is going to loop down to the brake caliper because the brake caliper connects in the rear. As the suspension moves, it's going to have plenty of space to flex, so it's not going to be an issue. All right, here's a glimpse of how the brake's been adapted to go from the Mini Cooper, which is this line here, which has a sheath of cable in it for the handbrake. And then this is, of course, the GSX hub that we've adapted to fit our application here. So basically what we've made this little bracket that we spliced together, basically the OEM Mini Cooper mount, which allowed us to fit the OEM cable without making anything crazy annoying, and reuse the OEM clip. Now this clip does need to be replaced. It's a little bit destroyed, so it doesn't really snap in like it should, but that's not too big of an issue right now. And then back here, we've got just a bolt, grade 10 bolt. Doesn't need to be that strong, but why not use the best and never really worry about it. Zinc coated, so it's not going to rust or anything like that, which is nice. And basically we welded up this piece of angle iron and then a little reinforcing plate here, and that's all welded up so that doesn't flex when you pull the handbrake cable here. And that's the lever, of course, that pulls the brakes. So we have handbrake like so. So we did have this aluminum pipe here, and this I found out after I cut it in half is actually a somewhat expensive piece that comes from somebody that makes these for Mitsubishi. So this is a J pipe, but the problem with the J pipe is it lines up really crappily. Let me show you. Not crappily for a Mitsubishi, but for my application. This basically curves it straight into the radiator, which obviously will not work. So I cut it thinking if I cut it, I'll be able to, and I can't hold that in place, but imagine where that sits. Thinking I'd be able to do something like this. Problem is it's still too high, so it hits the radiator hose. In order to adjust it, I need to do like 7 more cuts, and I have to TIG weld everything in aluminum. Although it is a bigger pipe diameter, and the flange is bigger, you can see that it's hard to bolt in here, and it's already kind of awkward. And then when you throw that on there, it makes it really awkward because you got the manifold there, so it's hard to bolt in. It's probably larger than we need for this application, and later on I'll just get one of these with a 90-degree fitting welded on, and then just have it come off to the side, and then that way I can just put a silicone joiner right there. But that challenge is somewhat averted if we use the one that we found in the trunk, which is the OEM steel piece. So we can do pretty much like that. Now what we end up having to do is we still have to cut it, but at least we can weld it. We can weld steel, which isn't as hard to weld, and we can rotate it this way, which can clear our shifter assembly, our radiator hose, and also be able to bolt onto that flange and seal properly. So a lot of little alignment things here, and this is going to be actually probably one of the trickier parts of the intake system. And then we also have a reference here to tie in to our wastegate, which didn't have one before, so we can run straight off this. We'll have a boost controller later on, but again, at least this way we got something working in the beginning, and we can always upgrade it as we need later on. So what we have here is our intake pipe. It's a relatively small bottleneck right here, and then it picks up larger here, and then even larger as it goes into the 2-inch piping, or 2.5-inch piping. So the radiator hose, when it's on, is like this, so you can get plenty of space. And then, of course, over here, we just welded another steel pipe to extend it out to here, so we didn't have to worry about putting a coupler here. And if we did put our adapter coupler, that blue one there, that would end up hitting the radiator hose. So we extended that forward, and then we'll be able to throw this on there. And then from there, we've got some more angled bits, and then from there it goes intercooler, later. We're going to do a straight pipe for now, and then it goes into our blow-off valve and then into our throttle body. I may or may not change this later on to be a aluminum elbow, but for right now I think it's going to be fine. It's, again, not a huge loss. And then the last thing that we'll have to do later on is I got a bung for this. I screwed it up, so I got to order another one. But basically right here we're going to weld in our intake temperature sensor. So that's going to get that right as it goes in the ECU, and of course right after the intercooler, and right into the engine, and then makes lots of power and choo-choo noises. So here's how we fixed our shifter issue. Basically before we had fifth and then reverse on the bottom left where second should be. So everything was basically flipped. So what we needed to do was basically flip the left and right, which is what we have here. So the way that this works, basically, it's just a little Z bracket that has a pivot. And what we also did was we took advantage of, since we had to build this, we decided to also change the throw ratio on this too. So that way we don't have such a huge left-right motion to go from second to third, or to go from fourth to fifth, or to go from fifth to fourth, etc. So basically, we have our input here, which is on the short side, and then our throw down here is on the long side. It does add a little bit extra effort, but again, it's not like a huge deal. It's pretty easy to overcome. It's not like it's almost not even noticeable. So what we ended up having to do to make this work as perfect as we could, so we've got a welded bracket here that we bolted to basically the same arm that the pivot comes off of. We did work a little bit to take some of the slop out down here, and then that comes up with some square tube. That square tube then has a bolt that is welded to it so that it is fixed in kind of as close to perfectly horizontal as I could get. And from there, we had to put like a, I don't even know where, I just found this laying around, but it's like a zinc coated piece of steel that has the exact ID as the bolt, so it fit perfectly. And then the OD was slightly bigger than the ID of this other pipe that we have here. This is some electronically welded tube that we had laying around. So we put that thing on the lathe, and we just kind of turned it so we still are able to pivot around here, even though this is tight and it's not going to slip off. And you do have a little side-to-side action there, but it's not really a huge deal. So when we need to shift, you can basically see how it works. As this pushes forward, that pulls back on the bottom there, which is the transmission. And then, of course, as you pull back, then that pushes forward. So that's going to be the side-to-side motion is what makes that happen, which then lifts that, which gives you your different gear selections. All right, so there's a few different ways of activating the fuel pump. The fuel pump is actually controlled by the ECU, which is a little bit of a problem because I took the ECU out. So what we have to do is either hack into the OEM relay box, which is down there on the floor. However, the issue with that, the relay is not like a normal car where it's just plug in. They actually built the relay into the fuse box. So let's say your fuel pump relay goes out, you actually need an entire new fuse box assembly to replace it. So you can't just get that one relay. So part of getting rid of that, and then the other part is doing a kind of like a rewire that a lot of other cars do, a fuel pump rewire for this. Now, in this car, it comes stock with 180 horsepower. There's not really a need for this, but I do want to at least future-proof and kind of maximize what I do have by minimizing voltage drop from the battery to the fuel pump. So what I'm doing is I'm routing 12-gauge wire under the carpet and to the back here, and then splicing in the OEM harness for the power. And then from there, I'm going to ground it out. I can either use the OE grounding, or what I might do is use the OE grounding plus a secondary grounding. From there, I'm going to have a relay actually trigger this 12-gauge wire to go ahead and turn on when the ECU turns on. So the ECU does have fuel pump control, so I'll just use a relay for that, and then relay on 100% to the fuel pump. And then this does have a boost referenced fuel pressure regulator, which is good because it was boosted originally, so we already have that, but I don't exactly know how that works. I don't know if it's only for boost or if it's a boost and vac, and what the default pressure is versus what the pressure is with vacuum and with boost. So I don't know where the range sits for that pump. So we'll find that out once we get it all hooked up and installed, and then we can trigger it on, read what the pressure is, and then from there you go, ah, okay, the pressure's 50 psi, and then it adds boost, or 40 psi adds boost, whatever. So we've drilled a hole in the seat. This won't be felt when the cushion is on top. And then what we're going to go ahead and do, we got a couple of inserts here with some hose. Very soft hose. It's not like a normal hose, but just to take up some of that extra space in there. And we'll tuck it under the carpet and everything, and then this ground will stay here, get covered up by the seat, which is good. And then we'll tap this side into our ground, which I don't remember which one was our ground. I'll have to double check the wiring on that. And then this one will go to the positive, which I think it's positive on this side, negative on this side, but that's why you double check everything. And then I'll splice these into the OE harness, so that way I can get everything, the fuel level sender and everything else is gonna work and still be stock. So that'll be cool. And these came with AN fittings, which is cool, but I need to borrow them. I need to borrow them to fit up here. And this is the stock fuel line, which looks to be about 5/16, possibly 1/4 inch, depending on how big it is once we chop it off. But basically it's just crimped on right here. So we're just gonna cut this hose and then see where we fit. All right, so we've just unplugged our cam sensor and crank sensor. That thing needs to be replaced anyway, but we're just gonna try and see if we can fit up our angles and see if this one's actually gonna work. And it looks like angle-wise, that's freaking perfect. Obviously, it worked on this engine before. I think it was on the other side though, but still, that's not even important right now. So yeah, something like that's gonna come right around, and it's basically gonna fit straight up to the stock Mini Cooper hose. So that's gonna be perfect. And we'll have to fix, it looks like it's gonna rub down there on that engine mount. So we'll bend that hard line a little bit to get more clearance and reroute it and then get it all hooked up here like that. God damn it. That did not work out like I planned at all. I'm not a lefty shit. Fuel line bent up and into the fuel rail. All right, so what we're trying to do now is we're going to see if we can test the fuel pressure that we have in the system just from the pump on its own to see how much PSI we're going to get here. So we kind of mix and match some of our fittings, and we basically hooked up the fuel pressure regulator, and then we actually plugged it off down there. So we're going to see if this line here, which is the conversion point from the Mini Cooper line to the fittings that came with the GSX, and we'll eventually go to the fuel rail, and we're going to see if those are leak proof, so if that's going to work for us. And we're also going to go ahead and check to see what our base fuel pressure is going to be straight from the pump to see if we even need a fuel pressure regulator. Okay, so this is the wire coming off the fuel pump from our fuel pump rewire. We haven't hooked it up to a relay yet because we don't have a trigger for it. So we're just using a couple of alligator clips to hopefully increase the diameter of the wires. And we're just going to temporarily run and see how much fuel we get by connecting it straight to the battery. So here we go. Let's check the fuel pressure and hopefully we don't get any leaks. Ah, that's a lot more than I thought. I don't see any leaks though. And we'll check here. Sorry, that was 80 PSI, not 90. That's an 8. So we have this, which perfect. So we'll snug that up, and that should seal. And basically, that's going to allow us to now have fuel. Our pump puts out 80 PSI here, so we'll have 80 PSI in the injectors. And of course, depending on how our fuel pump holds up, which was 210 at 40 PSI and like way less at 80 PSI. So we'll see how that flows, but it doesn't really need any pressure to compensate for boost. It's very high already. So that cap should be all that we need. And now we have fuel to the fuel rail, the injectors work, the drivers work. It's coming together. And yes, I'm wearing a hat because it's 10 degrees right now and it's so freaking cold. I don't vape. That's my breath.